after a disappointing season, the Canucks will try to turn things around, but how much ground can they make up in a tough Western Conference? Hey everyone, Rob Wong with you. Welcome into another NHL season preview as we take a look at the Vancouver Canucks, and joining me to do that today is Patrick Johnston of the Province. And Patrick, let's start with one of the biggest stories of the offseason, and that was the Canucks naming Quin Hughes, their 15th captain in franchise history, taking over for Bo Horvat, who was dealt last season to the Islanders. I'm always intrigued when young players like Hughes get thrust into these situations. How do you think he'll fare wearing the C?
Great to be here, Rob. Yeah, I think it was an obvious one. Everyone kind of saw this one coming. I mean, if you weren't paying attention, maybe you didn't. But if you were paying any attention, especially with how things played out at the end of last season, Quin Hughes quite notably took a step forward, I would say, and really kind of stepped up to the plate as a sort of the lead spokesman for the team, spoke quite positively and passionately about the importance of things like Canucks Pride Night. Was the man who was handed the mic after the final season, the final game of the season at home, to thank the fans. A tradition they sort of have made in the last few seasons. And it was quite clear that I think he understood what was in front of him. And at the end of the season, I asked Rick Tocchet, said, could he be a captain? And he said certainly has all the qualities. So it's a player that obviously is one of the Canucks' best players. Certainly, I think the best. He's the best best person to line up at defense. Whether he's a defenseman is a different question. I think he's something different, but certainly in the position he stands in, he is the best player they've ever had in this town. So a leader on the ice, and you talk to his teammates, and everyone talked last year, especially sort of behind the scenes over the last second half of the season. I think especially once Bo Horvat left, and sort of the future of the team and the leadership department was clearly going to unfold in a new direction. He spoke up more, and he's never been a guy that necessarily was inclined to speak up. But he's talking a lot about this, knowing the role that he's in now, and the importance of a player like him leading the way. And I've asked, that's the story I'm working on right now, but essentially, what is he like? What does he become? Is he speaking up more? Does he recognize that the position has a bit more, sort of a bit more weight to it, that there's sort of almost an expectation you're filling a role? I think he's up for all these things. Captain's not the rah-rah Mark Messier, going to drag everyone into the fight kind of thing anymore. It's very much about setting a tone and being a presence as much as anything. And I think he clearly has that. That's a bit of an X factor thing. And his teammates look to him. They know that he's going to get them out of trouble. It's why you can't really have a fourth liner as a captain anymore. You need a guy who can step up as much on the ice as it is. Like I said, there's that presence, but you've got to be able to do it. And he can definitely do it. He fixes problems for his team. In the long tradition of captains we've had here, that's been very much a demonstration of leadership, as opposed to necessarily a vocal, loudest guy in the room kind of thing. He's not the loudest guy in the room, but you look back, you look at Bo Horvat. Like Horvat, obviously I would say actually a pretty big personality, maybe bigger than people realize, but he was still there was a bit of a captain serious element to him. Obviously Henrik Sedin, a smart sort of in that sort of smart intellectual kind of vein, set the tone, was a presence. Technically, Roberto Luongo was in that mix. I think he was a bit different, but was a quieter type when he came in, but a guy that the whole team looked to be a key player. Marcus Naslund before that. A long run of, we're going back 20 years now, right? Or more than. We're talking about a run of guys who have really been a presence, have sort of set the tone and led the way, and I think Quin Hughes will be exactly that again.
So you mentioned Roberto Luongo, and goaltending always a hot topic in any NHL market, but especially Vancouver. And Thatcher Demco did not have the season he or anyone expected last season. And with Demco and Casey DeSmith now in the mix, what are you expecting from the goaltending position this year?
Well, Demco, you've exactly nailed it. He didn't play well at all to start last year. It's the classic show me a good coach and I'll show you a great goalie. Bruce Boudreau, his team struggled after the season before, finishing on high note's the wrong term, but they were cresting at the right time. They almost made the playoffs at the end of 21-22 with Bruce Boudreau having taken over midseason. But I think a lot of us knew at the time it was built almost entirely on the coach. I mean, Boudreau, or on the goalie, I should say. Coach even himself knew that. And so last year they came into the season Obviously couldn't kill a penalty to save their lives, but didn't defend well. And then behind all that, Thatcher Demco was the worst we've ever seen. And struggled a lot with confidence, with technique, all kinds of things were going wrong. And then he got hurt, and he was out for 2 months. When he came back, he was very much back to the player we've been used to. He was a stellar story for the Canucks, a big impact in that they didn't come close to making the playoffs in the end, but they played very well. They won a lot more games than probably most people wanted them to, but they showed that potential that I think management has in them going into this year. And that one of the reasons why I think if you want to say this year's going to be different and try to push aside the cynicism and the skepticism I think most Canucks fans have developed over the past, say, 10 years, the fact that Demko is ready to go. You know, he was very loose at camp last week, very, very sort of upbeat and talking with us. Whereas I think a year ago there was just a lot of tension in his life for whatever reason. And, you know, he's a new father now. You know, when you have kids, that inevitably changes your perspective on a lot of stuff. And you know, I talked to him at the end of last season, and he just rediscovered himself mentally and got refocused. And so, you know, Thatcher Demko obviously is everything. If they get the big performance from him, then they'll be set up for a huge season, or at least they'll have they'll be set up. Set up is the right word. They'll be set up for a huge season. And then, you mentioned briefly, Casey DeSmith brought in a goalie that Jim Rutherford and Patrick Alvin and Rick Tocchet know pretty well. Tocchet obviously wasn't there for very long in Pittsburgh when they picked up DeSmith, but a guy that certainly Alvin scouted a little bit, that Rutherford made the ultimate decision to sign. A guy that I think has the chops to do the job, to be that backup. And the Canucks are leaning on him to give them 25, 30 starts. I mean, I think one of the other things they recognized coming out of 2 seasons ago, when, like I said, when they rode Demko so hard, was that they needed to give him more rest. And he's a guy that at his best, you know, all goalies want to play a ton, but at his best, he's rested. You know, he can go for a run, then have a break, go for a run, take a break. And they tried it with Spencer Martin last year. It obviously didn't work. He buckled under the pressure once Demko went out. They do like Archer Shelovs a lot, but I think they're sort of thinking he's not maybe next year's guy. So, yeah, it's just Smith is a move to get a bunch of starts from a guy they think can do the job. And obviously, you know, they need more from the players in front of the goalies. So that's as much of the story here as anything, is can this team defend better than it has in the last couple of years? And if they do, they're looking good.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we were at that point of the season, or before the season, where it's why not us? And the Canucks finished 12 points out of a wild card spot last year. We know the Pacific Division is going to be tough once again. I guess playoffs aside, I mean, what would count as a successful season, or is it playoffs or bust for this team?
It's playoffs or bust. It's, you know, this is year 2 of Patrick Alvin, but 2.5. You know, they've been clear from the beginning that they know that they needed to, you know, shuffle the deck at least, but also find improvements in the roster. You know, I go back to the end of January when they announced that Ilya Mikheyev was shutting down for the season with his knee surgery, and asking Alvin then, why now? And he was honest. He said, well, I think we're 27th in the league. Like, all the metrics are terrible. This team is not good enough. We're not going to make the playoffs with this group. And, you know, they traded Bo Horvat. They got rid of Oliver Ekman-Larsson. They have signed a bunch of, you know, sort of depth mid-tier free agents. You know, Carson Soucy and Pius Suter, I think, are the most sort of impactful. Ian Cole, obviously, they want his veteran leadership, but they're trying to change the mix in there again, find a proper third-line center, find a mid-range defenseman. If all that works, as Rutherford said himself, if everything works, then there'll be a playoff. But he knows that not everything's going to work. And so now the question is, have they done enough? Do they have enough around the edges to absorb some of those punches that are going to come, whether it's a serious injury or a bad run of luck or something else not working the way they want it to work. So it's playoffs or bust. It's pretty simple. I mean, if they don't make it, obviously this is only, you know, Rick Tocchet's still new in his job. I don't think Rick Tocchet's going anywhere, But you start wondering, Jim Rutherford was brought in for a reason. You wonder how he's going to be thinking about all this. His contract, in theory, ends at the end of the season. Patrick Allvin, obviously, probably deserves another year or two in charge. But it's, ownership is impatient. That has been a problem in the past. But in this case, they want playoffs. I think fans want playoffs. I think fans want something to believe in. That's if fans find something to believe in sort of a more thematic, metaphorical sense, beyond just making the playoffs. If the fans find something to believe in, I think you can count this as a successful season. But it's hard to see them having a successful season if they're not in the playoffs.
Yeah, well, never a dull day in Vancouver when it comes to the Canucks. We'll see what they have in store this season. For all of Patrick's Canucks coverage this year, head over to the province.